thank you so much, everyone, for participating in another Canadian Export Challenge Bootcamp. We are so excited to have everybody here today. My name is Kayla Isabel, and I'm the Executive Director here at Startup Canada. So really, to support entrepreneurs in anticipation for our Canadian Export Challenge in September, we have a series of one-day Go Global virtual accelerators that will be launching mid-September, where startups and scale-ups can win up to $25,000 and up to $100,000 in-kind support for a pitch competition. We're also doing a series of boot camps and virtual accelerators over the coming summer months. So this is in partnership with our sponsors, with a special thanks to UPS, to the Trade Commissioner Service, and to EDC, our co-presenting partners who really bring all of these sessions to life. We are doing a series of boot camps and virtual accelerators to really support entrepreneurs as they navigate the export environment over the next couple of months. We know that COVID has obviously had a huge impact on startups and scale-ups across Canada and internationally, and our ability to export and leverage all of the various resources that we might have day to day. So these boot camps and virtual accelerators are really intended to give everyone practical advice, dedicated resources, and subject matter expertise from partners internationally to make sure that all entrepreneurs are equipped with what they need to go global. So today, we are going to be discussing how to market your startup globally in partnership with Publicize. And we're going to be talking about topics such as market research, storytelling, journalism in different regions, and really understanding the best practices of public relations. So I would love to take this opportunity to introduce our host today, Sjoerd Martens, who is the head of account management at Publicize and a great friend to the Startup Canada community. Sjoerd leads the account management team at Publicize in Colombia, so he's based down there at the moment, originally from the Netherlands. And his background is in international business and entrepreneurship with a master's degree in business administration and a really robust history working with startups and in the sharing economy. So throughout today's conversation, you are more than welcome to ask questions. At the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A chat that you are welcome to use, so you can type a question into there. We'll handle them as the conversation evolves, and we also have a question and answer period at the very end. You're also welcome to connect to the rest of the attendees in the chat function on the right and ask any questions as they evolve during the session. But without further ado, I'll pass things over to Sjoerd to kick things off and introduce yourself with a bit more color commentary.
Awesome. Thank you, Kayla. Well, yeah, hi guys. Yeah, welcome from joining us today. Thank you so much for your time and attention. My name is Sjoerd. It's a very common name in the Netherlands, where I'm from. Outside of the Netherlands, it's quite difficult, so I have the pronunciation there on screen for you guys. It's Sjoerd, not as Sjoerd or anything like that. It's always a good icebreaker, especially at the beginning of these sort of international conversations, right? I'm definitely looking forward to a interactive sort of session. So as Kayla said, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A section and such. More than happy to answer those. If you do want to connect with me, at some point I've left my email address here and my LinkedIn, and these slides will also be shared so you can find everything through there. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. The agenda for today is looking into like market research. We have storytelling and pitching. So how do these things kind of relate to each other? It is that market research is kind of like the why. Why do you want to go global? What does that mean to you? Storytelling is like the what. What will you then be offering in order to get that attention that you deserve or that you want? And pitching is going to look into the more granular work in terms of like, how can I approach journalists, publications, media, and what kind of like tips can I share with you guys on this, right? So first thing is research for market fit. I do wanna start this conversation today by kicking in some open doors. It sounds simple enough, but here are a couple very important questions to ask yourself. If you can't give yourself the answer on these questions, then obviously, yeah, you might want to reassess your situation. So make sure that you can answer them forwards, backwards, and inside out. You really need to, yeah, spend time on these answers in order to get started, because obviously this is kind of like the foundation to start from. At Publicize, we have a lot of people, a lot of organizations that are constantly looking into expanding into other markets. And this is the first step that we always try to take together with them in order to get the messaging right. So the first question that we always have is like, why do you want to go global? Like, what does that mean to you? Is it because you feel that there is a necessity? If is it because there's a sort of like a urge? Have you identified an opportunity, or maybe it's because of, it could be even as silly as your ego, right? That you want to become a global company. That's all good, but make sure that you have your reason right. And then as soon as you kind of like decide, okay, I'm ready, this is what I want to do. What does going global mean to you, actually? Because obviously global might sound a little bit scary. It might be more of a multinational approach. It might be like yeah, an approach for different continents. Going global, obviously, with these borders fading more and more, and especially with us being, yeah, either locked up or inside and on the internet and having the entire world available in those kind of like virtual methods, going global is definitely something to assess. And the first step that you can then do the first step that you can take in order to get to that point is to find out whether or not there's a market fit abroad. So that's kind of like looking into the competitive landscape. It's focusing on the problem you're trying to solve. And then to some extent also looking into like, how can I take advantage of trends, cultures, and habits in order to find the perfect market fit. So if we dive a little bit further into that, the first step to any sort of like successful PR launch is determining your audience profile and your specific market fit with regarding to the problem you're solving. Most likely you're going to be in a situation that if you want to start marketing globally, you have to work hard in order to get the attention that you deserve. If your product is a solution for a problem that your audience doesn't realize that there is a problem, then obviously they will never find your product successful or useful. If your targeting is off and the product isn't a fit for that specific audience, then also that's going to cause failures, obviously. Now, luckily, you can look to some of your competitors for their sort of best practices that they, obviously have online. You don't have to reinvent the wheel in this aspect. And additionally, by doing this competitor analysis, it offers also the opportunity for you to find out how you can stand out from them, right? Because you don't want to, be that copycat, but you can definitely look into like, how do they tackle certain cultural fit? How do they use sort of like events around a specific sort of like local community? And all of that will help you, go global. So for a business that transcends borders, the need for a global marketing strategy is paramount. Obviously, clear messaging will help. Using the same content marketing in every market just it won't work. After all, like different markets have different people, different parts of the world, and all of that needs to be considered in order to have like a good fit in terms of your product offering, but also the people that you reach out to. And using culture, but also like values, religions, events, and so are going to help, get that sort of connection with the people that you're aiming for. And then obviously like a targeted outreach, clear communication, consistent messaging also are key to properly reach out to your audience profile and communicate the defining factors or USPs against your competition. So then this is kind of like some sort of business jargon that I wanted to throw in there to give you guys a little bit more of a kind of like a hands-on example, and it's the term glocalization. While I am no specific fan of this sort of like terms, it does give a good understanding of how you can think globally and act locally. So I use these two specific examples of a B2C and a B2B company in which you can see that they have opted for a glocalization sort of approach, right? They've opted to have a global organization, but then they also have these local, in this case, Twitter accounts, in order to really connect with the local people because they have different values, there's a different culture, there's even different sort of holidays. So all of that is what they take into consideration. Now, obviously, I know that I'm speaking to an audience that don't have these like large multinationals, but this is definitely a sort of practice that you can adapt yourself in order to really, have an edge towards your competition that might also go global, right? So the fact that you're aware of this, that if you want to have a global approach, you can also look into like local, cultures and such. That will kind of like help you stand out. So that's a specific example that I obviously wanted to add in here. Now, I do want to highlight also that it doesn't really help you if you want to copy paste campaigns across different countries and borders and such. So for a specific example that comes up a lot in our sort of industry is the course example, which some believe to be true, some might not, but for the example, it doesn't really matter. So what happened is that they failed to check colloquial terms. So they ended up with they have their tagline, their motto, if you will, and they wanted to translate that to Spanish. And because of the way that it was phrased, it may or may not, again, have like turned out to be suffer from diarrhea because of the specific tagline that they used, and they didn't check whether or not in slang that might have had a different approach, right? So obviously for a beer manufacturer being associated with diarrhea, that obviously is something that you want to check. So make sure that if you do reach a different location, that you also check with these sort of things. They had turned it loose at as their motto. And obviously, if you translate that directly to Spanish, you might get something else. So in this case, just as an example, but make sure that you look into this, because obviously it can make a big difference whether or not you have these sort of things in the back of your head. So as soon as you kind of decide that you have a good market fit, you then want to look into like, okay, what do I want to say, and how can I get to that specific audience, right? So the first part, what do you want to what is the message, what is the narrative that you want to come forward with? That is a technique which we call storytelling. So as soon as you feel that you're ready to start communicating the sort of message to the right people, storytelling will be a great way in order to help you present that story in a way that actually catches on. Storytelling is actually part of our everyday life, whether or not you realize it or not. Everyone has a story to tell. Everyone can tell stories in a different way. Some people are better at it than others. But we all realize that if a story is told well, people will want to listen to it. So people will want to see a sort of benefit in it for them to actually listen to your story. So at Publicize, we receive clients from a variety of backgrounds, from pre-launch tech startups to like very traditional, slow multinationals, but even like single entrepreneurs. Our job is to find a story, a sort of like angle that we can use in order to help them get the media attention they deserve or that they want. So we use storytelling as an inciting way to communicate their value as a kind of like business development tool. So in storytelling, the goal is actually to communicate useful information that moves or inspires the audience through a memorable narrative that's easily shared with others. Because we're all made of stories, and the things that we have in common, bring us together, right? So if you have a good story, then you might have people really connect to your brand. The power of storytelling is pretty clear. Stories catch our attention, they influence us, they inspire us to act, and they make us feel united as human beings. So especially if you want to go global and you are working hard in order to get the media attention you want, storytelling is a very powerful tool in order to help you with that aspect, in order to come across organic as well. So this slide kind of like recaps a lot of information with regard to storytelling. Although there's a science to storytelling, storytelling in itself is not an exact science. Like stories do have a structure, but telling a story is more of an art than actual science. And since there are many ways in which you can tell a story that greatly depends on who you're telling the story to, there are no strict rules you have to follow. But while you develop your own art and style of storytelling, the guidelines that we're going to show you today will help make the process easier and more effective, hopefully, as well. If you don't have credibility, the audience won't care about what you have to say. So this is another aspect that you need to focus on. And if you don't have the relatability, the audience won't respond or answer to your call to action. So as Ty Bennett, who is a famous keynote speaker and storytelling expert, would say, the purpose is not perfection, it's rather connection. So how do we get to that point? Well, we have to realize that you can build a story around an idea, but the idea in itself is not a story and never will be. There's probably an interesting story behind every company or product, but the fact that said product or company exists is not a story. There are thousands of companies and millions of products out there already. Unless a company is doing something truly unique, something that will mark, something that really stands out from the crowd, it will become difficult to get attention. So that's why you want to really use this sort of storytelling, and that's obviously why agencies like Publicize exist. We won't be able to solve all your problems, but we will be able to help you articulate your story or to come up with the angle. So you can use PR as a vehicle for exposure. Ads are another way to do so, but obviously ad spaces, depending on the medium, can obviously come with a very steep price tag. So that's why Publicize actually focuses a lot on organic media approach, in which we try to add value to the publication, the readers, and ultimately also our clients, and in this case, like the companies that we work with. I think that what we always try to do is we want to find an angle that works for everybody. And a few different techniques that we use here are news hooks, using analogies, looking into trends, but also, even using something like holidays to our advantage. So that way you can, really get some attention for your company. So if we look into some good examples, at Publicize, we came up with these three. Obviously, the first one with the Yoda and Star Wars is not one of our own examples, but I do think that this is a very good example that I wanted to share with you today. So Star Wars managed to have hijacked an entire holiday by using their "May the Force be with you." So they lightheartedly, marketed this sort of phrase into a certain date. And that way they have May the 4th as the Star Wars date. And obviously with that, you can then start creating campaigns. And luckily for them, it's also an annual date. So every year they can come back to the May the 4th, right? So they hijacked an entire holiday for themselves. Obviously they are a very large sort of, enterprise and brand. So no surprises there. But you can do something similar, obviously, by using a holiday to your advantage. So let's say that you have a product that is specifically designed for a male audience, then you might be able to use Father's Day in order to get into like the top 5 list for your B2C sort of product, right? So that's kind of like a good way to use a relevant news angle here in order to come forward with, to be able to push your brand out and to connect with the people. Another example that I wanted to share with you today that is something that Publicize has done is this article that we have on the top right, which is Venezuela is losing a generation of tech talent to its humanitarian crisis. So this is a way in which we actually collaborated with a journalist that we knew that at some point while we were building the relationship, we figured out that he was actually writing a story about Venezuela and the fact that a lot of the people there they were living under such poor circumstances that they were moving to different countries. So we work with another a company that actually saw that they had an increase of Venezuelan people obviously crossing the border, but then also applying to their company. And obviously these are also very skilled people, right? Like a lot of them also have access to internet, so they might have, become really good at coding. So this company used the relationship that we had with this journalist in order to incorporate themselves into the story and to actually transcend the message that they also focus on diversity, but also inclusion. And obviously this article on TechCrunch, which I think everybody here today knows as a large publication, is a great way to really connect with your audience. So this made their company look a lot more human, obviously, and that was something that they, to this date, the article is already more than a year old. They can fall back on that media result. And another example that I wanted to share with you today is this last one, which is a little bit more, out of the box, you might say. So we were working with a business entrepreneur that really wanted to showcase his expertise as a leader, as a strong entrepreneur. And we found out that he actually had an alpaca farm together with his wife. So we asked him, like, hey, what are the differences, or whether the analogies, the kind of like the connections can we make between your one organization in the telecom industry and your other organization, which is an alpaca farm. And obviously, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later too. If you're going to be reaching out to journalists, then you want to offer them something that is interesting from the beginning. So obviously something as enticing as a title of an article, such as this one, what owning an alpaca farm has taught me about running a tech startup. Obviously is a great way within in a journalist's email inbox to see that title, and then for them obviously to click on that. So this one also did really well, and it's definitely the one that I wanted to share with you, to look into, like, okay, even if your company exists, how can you still use other things in order to get your media attention? Then I quickly wanted to go into a couple of other bad examples, just to keep it a little bit more tangible, obviously. So on the top, we have this Pepsi example with Kendall Jenner. I don't know if you've seen this actual commercial. So what Pepsi tried to kind of convey was that this ad, the global ad, reflects that people from different walks of life coming together in spirit of harmony. We think that that's an important message to convey. But however, the audience actually perceived it much more as that they're trying to tie their story to current events in the wrong way. So claiming that their product is making a difference, when in reality the connection is rather like loose. So obviously this is a very global enterprise, and obviously the backlash of it is bigger. But this is a way in which they try to use current events, but obviously in a bad way, where they really try to be like try to emerge themselves into a conversation without being organic. So it was also perceived by the end user and the consumers in that way. And there's sort of like similar thing that happened was with this UK magazine, NME. So they ran a cover about depression during Mental Health Awareness Week. Again, that's obviously actually a good thing to do. However, they actually used the image of an artist without his consent. And they also included quotes from another interview he had done. So after that, this specific artist, Stormzy, reached and said that he was used as a poster boy for depression, obviously completely distracting you from the actual message, right? So that's another way that the idea was good, the execution was very poorly. And then there's this other Peloton ad. I don't know if you've seen that one too. It's an ad that was, the campaign was called The Gift That Gives Back. So they had this nice looking advertisement during Christmas in which a very thin woman gleefully received a stationary bike from her husband for Christmas. And then the ad progresses, and she's obviously documenting her grueling year on the bike. And obviously this kind of like transcends the message that a thin person already gets a bike that does something for her husband, and it kind of backfired. Peloton actually claimed that its customers really loved it, but they also saw that their stock dropped with 9%, basically erasing 950 million from its market value. So that's also the power of storytelling, right? Like you have to really look into how you want, what is the message that you want to convey, and the delivery is important there too. Now, speaking about delivery, I wanted to jump to the next part, which is how you want to pitch your company, and then the story that you want to pitch behind it. And so this part, pitching for media placements globally, is more looking into how. So as soon as you have your foundation ready with the market fit, you know, like what is the story that you want to tell. Then obviously you can start defining like, okay, how do I want to make sure that that story ends up in the right sort of locations. So obviously pitching for media placements is a strong one, and that's our bread and butter, obviously. So I quickly wanted to recap a little bit in terms of like how the media industry and PR in general has changed over the years. Some still think that it's very much a mad men style sort of schmoozing. There's a lot of rubbing each other's backs. There's a lot of like relationship building, and that definitely still happens. But obviously, there's also much more competition out there. So publications actually need to make sure that they connect with their readers, because the reader might as easily jump to a different publication, sign up for a different newspaper, or stop watching your YouTube channel or ads or anything like that. So the media industry has definitely changed. There's so much competition out there that a lot of these publications also work with a lot of freelancers. So they actually don't have as much in-house writers anymore. So the freelancers are another sort of like bridge in the relationship between you and the media, where they have to buy into your story, and then they have to also pitch that story to one of the publications that they work with. So there's much more competition out there, which makes it a much more competitive sort of market, right? And obviously at the moment we also have much more startups. There's much more people like screaming for attention. So that's why you need to be strategic in order to like get the attention that you deserve, right? So that's obviously like how we look at it. I wanted to give you some specific general pitching guidelines. So as I said, that you're not the only one with ideas. So make sure you do your homework. Make sure that you reach out to the right people. Convey why the story is important to the audience. And with the audience, obviously, the first step is the journalist. The second step is the entire publication behind it and the readers. Don't send overly promotional jargon-heavy pitches. They'll read through that. Keep in mind that some journalists receive up to like 1,000 pitches a day. So if they see something that is filled with amazing, groundbreaking, next Elon Musk, those kind of things, they're not gonna buy into that. So one of the things that we always try to do is to get to the point fairly easily, quickly, and clearly, so that the journalist also spends less time going through all of the information, but that you go straight to the point. One way to do that is using the active void, so avoid using the passive one. I don't even want to talk about this next point, but it's so important. Like make sure that your spelling and grammar is on point, and that also the sentence length is simple and easy to read. You don't have to less is more to some extent in this aspect. I also wanted to really highlight that especially in the relationship building aspect, our experiences is that it's better to cherry pick the people that you want to reach out to than to blast it out to everybody that you know that exists in the tech sort of scene. So that's a big one. Your subject line is obviously the first touch point with the journalist. So make sure that you look into having a catchy, convincing, maybe even provocative sort of subject line, so that you grab their attention. Because if it's too generic, then they might not even bother to open your email. Don't follow up too aggressively. We've heard from a lot of journalists that they actually prefer to have just one a follow-up. The ideal scenario is like 2-3 days after that, but you can also give them a little bit more time and yeah, follow up the next week. If something happens around you that you might be able to use in order to kind of like refresh the idea that you're pitching, feel free to send another follow-up. But at some point, yeah, make sure that you don't just chase them with the same idea, because they might have read your email. And if you then keep pushing, then obviously you end up, yeah, kind of damaging that relationship, and they might just block your email altogether. And then the last 2 points are your timing is important. Obviously, that's a very important thing here to mention. Some journalists might clock out at 3 p.m. on a Friday. Others might take the time between Christmas and New Year's off. All of these like sort of like small little things help too. So make sure that you, yeah, reach out to the journalists on the moments where they actually have the capacity and the availability in order to work on your stories, and make sure that you're authentic. Journalists can poke through it. General audience can also see that too. So yeah, another important point. It's a very short one, but obviously a very important one too.
We've got 2 questions actually, Sjoerd, from the audience, if you don't mind. So first question coming from somebody: what's your best tip for connecting with journalists and finding journalists that cover stories specifically within your industry? So that's question number 1. And then I've got a question number 2 when you're done with that one.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely the best way for me to connect with journalists is to know like what they write about, right? So obviously, yeah, we can send them all sorts of funny cat memes if we see that they tweet about cats, for example. But in the end, you want to offer them something of value. The relationship is going to be, to some extent, a transactional one. So you want to make sure that you know what they're covering. So obviously, you can assume that they might be covering like technology or the intersection of technology and sustainability. But they might have also just had a conversation with their editor that said like, hey, you need to shift gears and start writing about something else. So a good way for me to connect with journalists, especially because obviously I'm doing this on a daily basis, is every now and then to reach out to something what we call a soft pitch, which is a way in which we reach out to ask them if they have anything that they're working on, if there's a connection that I might be able to make for them, and to offer your availability as an expert, or that you might be able to provide comments on a certain story that's happening at the moment. So that's a great way to, yeah, build that sort of relationship. And then the other thing that I'd like to highlight, which will also come back in the presentation a little bit later, is the use of Twitter, and especially like certain regions, but yeah, it's becoming more of a global thing, I'd say, is that journalists, yeah, as creative people with, yeah, good with words, they might adopt Twitter as their go-to platform. And it shares a lot of information about their personality, shares a lot of information about what they're writing about, what they find interesting, and that way you can really like personalize your pitch.
Fantastic. Thanks for that answer. And then we've got another question. How do I balance getting my story picked up without being too self-promoting? I think this is a challenge that we see a lot of startups challenge this. So do you have any tips there?
So yeah, like the general question that we always ask ourselves is, why would this be interesting to the audience of, let's say that you find out that you want to share your story with a tech publication, why do they want to read about this? So generally speaking, what we try to do is always to do our due diligence, obviously, whether or not the publication covers sort of similar stories on this. So that's a reason why, just to give a little bit of insight, for example, if people think about PR, they always also think about press releases. Now, the thing about press releases is that they're very promotional, because obviously you're making an announcement about your company. So the beauty of a press release obviously is that you have a PR draft that's ready to be copy pasted, so you can make life easy for a journalist. But on the other hand, it's also going to be more or less a yes/no sort of situation, whether or not the journalist wants to cover that. So the better journalist, the actual journalist, they will use the press release in order to ask questions to dive a little bit deeper. And that kind of like process is also kind of what you want to do if you want to become a little bit less promotional about your company, but rather focus on, okay, what kind of impact will this have on the industry? So if you can focus on answering that question, you can definitely make it a lot less promotional. And yeah, again, like some of the earlier tips that I shared in terms of like using an analogy, looking into using sort of like a comparison, but in general speaking, just finding out whether or not a similar sort of story has been published on the publication you want to go for is the general approach in which you can find out, okay, how promotional can I be? Because like one thing that I wanted to add here, the more promotional you become, the more of the easier it is for a journalist to understand that you are trying to make money off of the story that you're trying to pitch. So instead of seeing that as an editorial opportunity, that is a cool story that they might want to write for their publication about your company, they might say like, oh yeah, I'd like to put you in touch with our sales people that connect you to our editorial team that can write a fantastic sponsored opportunity that will also help drive you sales and such. But obviously, yeah, that in the organic media approach, it might not be the approach that you want to take. And obviously, you can test it out a little bit. You can focus on specific language and see what works better, what gives you better traction.
Fantastic. We've got another question and a great practical question. I love this. What is the right length of an email pitch? 3 to 4 small paragraphs, 50 to 75 words, shorter? What would be your tip there?
That's a great question indeed, Raj. So thanks for that. I think kind of the standard that I felt, and from some of the successful rates of the thousands and thousands of pitches that we send over the last years, I try to aim for something around 150 words. But there are a few practical tips to use to take into consideration too. So you don't want to send a pitch that's too long, because your call to action might be buried somewhere in the like the last paragraph and such. So what we try to do is we try to play around with the 3 to 4 paragraphs that you mentioned, to sometimes introduce the company or the client immediately, sometimes to focus on the news hook that we're using. We sometimes play around with highlighting the information into bullet points. Sometimes we rather use paragraphs. It is always good to make sure that you have all of the information available to the specific journalist. So a lot of the information that really talks about your company might be something that you want to add into like an about section or into like a 1-pager document. And you can attach it either as a kind of like a hyperlink that leads to like a Google Drive or a Dropbox sort of situation, so that you can like keep your pitch as condensed as possible. So yeah, I'd say 150 words to 200. That's kind of like the sweet spot for me. But you can definitely play around with your presentation, what kind of paragraphs you want to use first, and then move on from there.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ben. Dive right back into the presentation.
Awesome. Cool. So yeah, again, like one of the gatekeepers, if you will, to your story that may or may not get picked up is journalists, obviously. So as soon as you have your message ready, you then want to make sure that you have the right person. So still to this day, the easiest way to get media attention, obviously, if you're aiming for like an online sort of publication, is to do your research in terms of like, okay, let's say that my company is in this industry, then finding out in that industry what are the publications that talk about that, and then from there to like go on to the publication and find the specific journalist just by scrolling through the last 20 articles that they might have covered there. Sometimes there's an about page about the publication that also lists the entire masthead with all of the different individuals and their roles. So if you then want to like make sure that you have the right individual from within a publication, these couple questions I have here will definitely help, make sure that you have the right individual to reach out to. So first of all, you need to make sure that you have, the right reason that you're reaching out to an individual. So let's say you might want to reach out to Sarah from Publication Y. You can then, as a sort of exercise, you can then also ask yourself, okay, why do I pick Sarah specifically? And if you answer that question, you're already like quite far. If obviously you need to find out, do they cover the sort of stories that I'm pitching? So if you're pitching a press release and you see that this person only does interviews, then obviously you're sending a misfit there. You need to ask yourself, what is it from them? Like, would they be proud in order to share that story on your behalf? Or are you just like pitching it because you want your company to get onto this publication? Again, like, who do you contact? A freelancer needs to pitch that story to another publication, but it might be a great win because these freelancers are sometimes also connected to like the more larger sort of media, and that they have their ways in already, so they have their foot in the door, which makes it easier. You can also look into like your writing style. Like at the beginning, we talked a little bit about like what is your narrative, what kind of personality does your brand have? Maybe you're a little bit more playful, maybe you're a little bit more eloquent, or a little bit more professional. Obviously that needs to fit as well. And how do you approach them? In my next slide, I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. And when do you reach out to them? At this moment, we've seen that the moment, like, we always try to prefer to reach out early in the morning, obviously because their time, so that we make sure that we're at the top of their inbox when they start their day. But you can also play around with that. And sometimes some journalists, because they're more of a freelancer, they also have a little bit more flexibility in order to have their own hours, right? So there's no one way to roam in this aspect. So make sure that you try different avenues and play around with that. So this is a kind of a slide that really talks a little bit about our experience. Obviously, we're a Colombian company that operates from Colombia, with mostly clients from North America, with a team that is also like a lot of Europeans. We don't have any sort of discrimination towards any sort of geographical location or our company or industry. We work with all sorts of clients. From our experience, we've definitely noticed that in Latam, so Latin American countries, pitching by phone is a right way to go. For Europe, it's definitely not, and I'd say that North America is kind of like in the middle of that. Some only want to do pre-arranged sort of calls. Other journalists, they might have their contact information available. Obviously, there are some of the more larger services that have like this journalist database in which they also have your phone numbers. We often then see that, especially in North America, but Europe even more, there's always like, please don't contact this individual through phone, but rather through email. So keep that in mind. Email is definitely the most used version. But another thing that we see happening more and more is that pitching by Twitter has become really interesting. So the funny thing is that a lot of the journalists that are open to this, they will actually have that in their bio. So they will have either their email address available in their Twitter bio, or they will have their DMs, and so their direct message is open, so that you can send them a quick message about what you're trying to offer. And obviously, while you're on that Twitter account, you can already see like what kind of individual you're dealing with. Maybe they really like something a little bit more playful. Maybe they're like really pro or against certain themes. So use that to your advantage. And then as one of the kind of like last things that I wanted to share with you all today is to really look into like, okay, what kind of tools can I share with you all so that you can get started with your own sort of like relationship building and public relations. So from left to right, sorry, we have Twitter. Again, like Twitter, I've mentioned a couple times throughout this presentation, it's a great way to connect with your audience. In terms of like the journalists, it's a great way to get to know them. And yeah, off the back of that, you might be able to pitch them directly things through Twitter too. So make sure that yeah, you can find the journalists from the publication and then go to their Twitter account. Usually there's a direct link there, or the other way around, you might be able to search for certain terms and then end up on some of these high profile Twitter accounts. So use that to your advantage. The second one that I listed is SimilarWeb. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this one, but you actually can also use SimilarWeb in order to find other similar websites. So that's for what we mainly use it. But the nice thing about SimilarWeb is also that you can find a little bit of information when it comes to the size of the publication, the monthly viewers that they might have. And obviously this will help you yeah, create your media list when you're looking into specific target publications. So use SimilarWeb for that. Norbert is a great way to get the contact details from a journalist. So Norbert allows you to put in the name of a individual and then to put in like the domain that they're from. So it might be, for example, TechCrunch, if you're looking for a tech publication. Norbert has a prepaid service, which allows you to get the contact details if you don't have any sort of way in through Twitter or anything like that. Obviously, this is a great way for you to then get started. And I believe that they actually allow you to test their service with the first 100 or so ones. So make sure, yeah, if you want, you can definitely use that one. And last but not least, Cision has Haru, if I pronounce it right. It's an acronym that stands for Help a Reporter Out. So it is a email subscription service in which they send you a full list of all of the different reporters that are looking for help. So Haru is definitely focused on the North American market, but it is a great way to get media wins by yeah, having a request from a journalist that asks like, hey, I'm writing a story about this. I'm looking for experts or individuals with this sort of background. Like, I have a couple of questions. Feel free to reach out to me. And Haru has a kind of innovative way that for every request that a journalist makes, they create an individual email address so that you can only reply to the request and not directly to the individual. So that way the journalist might preserve their privacy. So these 4 tools are definitely like the 4 ones that that I would recommend if you want to get started with PR and to get the media attention, sorry, for your company. Questions?
Fantastic. We've got a couple coming in already, actually. So, and I believe you sort of high level answered this with some of the additional tools, but are there any other websites to find journalists, specifically in Canada, or any websites to find out where, who, and when pitches are held in Canada? Are there events where, you know, you can pitch to journalists in one consolidated space?
So that's a great question. Obviously, within different industries, you're always going to have opportunities, and obviously right now it's a little bit more difficult that the larger events will also attract journalists, right? So especially then you can have a more sort of like local approach to connect with people on a personal level too. And you can definitely then, yeah, possibly ask them to go for a coffee. I think that the easiest way in order to get your 360 view list of the media publications that you want to go for is just by starting off with a Google search and then just see that kind of like snowball into like a longer list. So usually, yeah, what you might be able to see is that you might connect with a certain influencer or freelancer that actually writes for different publications, so you can check those out. And then SimilarWeb, as I said, like is a great way to expand on your list by having possibly a little bit more of the industry vertical, so the more niche sort of publications to get that list sorted out. So that's kind of like my main tip to build your media list, especially considering that some of the yeah, the larger journalist databases are obviously like very expensive. So we usually yeah, if we want to like really go into like the deep corners of certain industry vertical publications, then we use SimilarWeb and Google search.
Fantastic. In terms of pitching and language that you should be pitching in, so if you are pitching globally and pitching in a country outside of Canada, is it necessary to pitch in the language of that country, or can you pitch in English? What would be your recommendation there?
That's a great question, actually. So I think that you have to look into like how advanced are these sort of countries that you're pitching to, right? So especially if I look at my own experience with dealing with some of the yeah, local Latam context, their English is good, but oh, I'm sorry, I think I quit the presentation. Are we good still?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I see that. I see what happened. But yeah, we definitely see that they feel like way less comfortable to reply to emails, right? And even like a phone call then becomes too much. So for Latam, it's definitely yeah, much more um, based on Spanish or even Portuguese for Brazil. The interesting thing is that in Europe, you can definitely get away with English. So I would definitely recommend that. And yeah, 9 out of 10 times you're also looking into something that has a little bit more of an international approach. My personal experience is that the French definitely and the German, they definitely also want to stick with their own language. But even then, I've had success with the sticking in English. But that's a great question. I do think that yeah, 90% of the cases you'll be fine if you just go for English.
Okay, good question there. Then LinkedIn. So I know we were focusing really on email and Twitter, but would you recommend LinkedIn? One of our guests was sharing that they've had a lot of success working and pitching to people on LinkedIn. What would be your recommendations around that?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is actually a great strategy as well, but it takes a little bit more time. The reason is that you often journalists, if they do want to yeah, be easy to connect with, they will have their information available already, either through an email address in their writer bio on their website that they write for, or yeah, possibly in their Twitter. So I find it that like 9 out of 10 people that I can find through either Twitter or the website, yeah, they will also have their information available on LinkedIn. However, with LinkedIn, yeah, obviously they have their own sort of business model that if you want to reach out to certain people that you can buy these email credits and such. So some of the journalists might take another step where you have to connect with them first. So I see that LinkedIn articles are a great way for you to connect with individuals, and you might be able to tag some of them. But obviously, it's a little bit more indirect than actually say, okay, I have this and I want to share this. How do I get their contact details? Because sometimes, yeah, as we've seen, as I hope everybody has kind of like experienced already, some people might really hide their LinkedIn information behind, yeah, connecting and such. So it's a kind of a separate strategy, but it's definitely also successful. If you put the time and effort into that.
And one attendee has also said you can also write LinkedIn articles. So actually creating your own copy and trying to get that picked up, that could be another avenue. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Michelle. Any final questions that the audience would like to pose? I think, yeah, we've covered a lot of really helpful ground. I've definitely learned a lot through this process and really appreciated, you know, this obvious global perspective that you have working with startups, working with scale-ups in the international space that, you know, the Canadian media landscape, we might be able to wrap our heads around that. But as we look to scale our businesses, how can we scale how we communicate about our businesses? So thank you, Sjoerd, for sharing all of these insights. As we mentioned, this session is recorded. So we will be sharing the recording with our audience today, and to anybody who's interested in getting this material. We'll also be sending this PowerPoint presentation so that you're welcome to use that internally, share it with your teams, and leverage the insights there. In terms of additional programming, so I'll share my screen to give everybody a bit of additional information about the rest of Startup Canada's programming that we have at the moment. So as I mentioned, we are doing a series of boot camps and virtual accelerators before our September Canadian Export Challenge program. So if you go to our website to startupcan.ca/pitch bootcamps, I'll include the link in the chat function, you'll see additional boot camps similar to what we had today. So we're doing a different kind of pitch building boot camp. We've covered a specific type of pitch today, but if you're looking at mastering your 90-second virtual pitch, you can get some insights from the team at Volition on July 14th and August. We talked today about marketing your startup globally. We'll also include the URLs here. We have an additional workshop coming up soon on getting digital, upping your e-commerce game with EDC, Google, and the Trade Commissioner Service. So we'll be talking all things e-commerce. And we're also going to be doing a series of virtual accelerators. So we're doing one session on women going global, giving them the tools specifically, including some panelists, some breakout sessions, workshops in sort of a mini virtual accelerator. And we will also be launching an Indigenous virtual accelerator. And those are presented by UPS, EDC, and the Trade Commissioner Service. So lots of content until we hit September. Then we really encourage you to pitch to the Canadian Export Challenge. So in September, we will be hosting our virtual accelerators regionally. You can find all the information on our website. We'll be emailing you information about how to send through your virtual 90-second pitch to enter to win $25,000 and $100K in-kind support for both startups and scale-ups. So we'll provide all of this information in the follow-up email. So in terms of final questions, we have a few that have actually just come in very quickly. Perhaps what we can do, Sjoerd, is we can send these questions to you because I know we're out of time in a minute, and we can send through some of those follow-up questions via email if that works.
Yeah, definitely. Like as I said, feel free to connect and send your questions my way. I'll be happy to answer them.
Fantastic. We'll include the contact info. And if you're looking to reach out to Publicize, get some insights, get some feedback on how to really market your organization globally, they're a fantastic partner and really knowledgeable, particularly about the audience that we serve and that's on the call today. So great introduction to have there. So thanks again, Sjoerd, for sharing these insights. Thank you, everyone. We'll follow up via email with the rest of the materials, and have a great rest of your afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.